Silas paused again, considering his next words carefully, wanting to convey something of the tower's particular character without overwhelming a stranger with more detail than any single letter could properly hold. You will come to know this light's particular moods better than you know your own in time. The mechanism runs slightly warm during the summer months and requires more frequent checking of the lubrication than the manual strictly specifies, a small local wisdom I learned only through my own early mistakes, one I hope this letter spares you from repeating. The stair's 17th step from the bottom creaks rather more loudly than any of the others, a fact you'll likely discover for yourself within your first week, regardless of anything I write here, though I mention it now so the sound doesn't startle you unnecessarily during some quiet night watch when you're expecting nothing but silence. He continued in this vein for a while, small practical details mixed increasingly with something closer to genuine reflection, the particular quality of light during a summer sunset versus a winter one, the best spot to watch for the seasonal arrival of the puffins that nested each spring along the rocks below the tower, a small, private pleasure Silas had never mentioned in any official log, but had nonetheless treasured across every one of his 32 springs at this post. The sky beyond the windows had deepened now into proper evening, the sunset's earlier pink softening into deeper shades of rose and gold, the sea below catching and holding that color in long, shifting streaks across its calm surface. Silas set his pen down for a moment, simply watching, allowing himself the particular pleasure of a sunset he had witnessed by now well over 10,000 times, and had somehow, remarkably, never once grown tired of. He thought of his late wife, Margaret, who had shared this view with him for the better part of 2 decades before her passing, the two of them often climbing these stairs together on calm evenings simply to watch the sunset from the lamp room's wide windows, a small shared ritual that had persisted faithfully through their whole married life, despite the practical inconvenience of the climb becoming gradually more difficult as the years accumulated. He missed her still, in the particular, settled way one misses someone after enough years have passed for grief to soften into something closer to grateful remembrance, and he found himself, on this particular evening, wishing gently that she could have been here to see this final watch properly concluded, though he suspected, in the easy, private way he had continued conversing with her memory across the past decade, that she was watching regardless, in whatever manner the departed managed to keep watch over the living they've left behind. Margaret had arrived in his life almost accidentally, a school teacher from the mainland who had visited Gannet Point one summer on a walking holiday with friends, and had, rather to both their surprise, found herself returning the following month on her own, having apparently decided somewhere along her journey home that the quiet, solitary keeper she'd met during her brief visit deserved rather more of her attention than one afternoon's polite conversation had allowed. They had married within the year, and though friends on the mainland had gently questioned her willingness to trade a comfortable teaching post for the isolated, demanding life of a keeper's wife, Margaret had never once, across their 20 years together, expressed anything but genuine contentment with the choice, teaching herself the mechanism's maintenance alongside him, learning the tides and the weather patterns with the same patient curiosity she'd once brought to her own classroom. She had taught their daughter to read in the small keeper's pottage at the base of the tower, using nothing more sophisticated than the modest collection of books they kept on hand and her own considerable teaching skill, and Silas could still picture with perfect clarity even now the particular image of his wife and small daughter curled together in the cottage's single good armchair on countless quiet evenings, working steadily through whatever story currently held their shared attention, while Silas himself climbed these same stairs for his evening watch, returning hours later to find them both asleep, book fallen open across their laps, exactly the kind of small, ordinary domestic scene he had treasured more than he'd properly understood at the time. He returned to his letter after a while, the light outside now deepening toward full evening, the first stars beginning to emerge faintly above the darkening water. I should tell you, too, about the logbook you'll find waiting in the drawer beneath this desk. My own predecessor, a good man named Obadiah March, left behind 3 sentences for me on my own first night here, words that carried me through more difficult watches than I can properly count. I have thought carefully about what similar words might serve you best, and though my own wisdom carries quite the same weight his did for me, I offer it now with the same sincere hope that it might ease your own early uncertainty as thoroughly as his once eased mine. There are certain letters a person writes only once in a lifetime, and Silas Fenwick had known, for the better part of a year now, that tonight would finally be the night he sat down to write his. He had kept the light at Gannet Point for 32 years, longer than any keeper before him in the tower's entire recorded history, and tomorrow morning a young woman named Bridget Callahan would arrive on the first ferry from the mainland to take up the post he was finally, after 3 decades of faithful service, ready to leave behind. His daughter had been asking him for years now to come live nearer to her and the grandchildren, and Silas, who had once considered the request faintly absurd, had found himself this past winter surprising even himself by finally saying yes. The decision had not arrived suddenly, but had built gradually across the previous several years, small moments accumulating one atop another until the eventual choice felt less like a dramatic change of course and more like the natural, inevitable conclusion of a story that had simply been building toward this particular ending all along. There had been the winter 2 years back when his knees had first properly complained about the tower's many stairs. Nothing serious, the doctor had assured him, but a clear enough signal that his body, however faithfully it had served him across 3 decades of demanding work, would not remain entirely unaffected by the accumulating years forever. There had been his granddaughter's 5th birthday, celebrated over a crackling telephone line rather than in person because the ferry schedule hadn't cooperated with his limited leave, a small disappointment that had lodged more deeply than he'd expected at the time. And there had been, more than anything else, his daughter's own patient, persistent love, expressed not through any dramatic ultimatum, but through years of gentle, consistent invitation, always offered without pressure, always simply left open for whenever he felt ready to accept it. He climbed the familiar spiral stairs that evening for what he understood with a quiet, settled clarity rather than any particular sorrow, as one of his last watches in this tower, carrying with him not his usual thermos and logbook alone, but also a fresh sheet of writing paper and his good fountain pen, the one his late wife had given him for their 10th anniversary, kept carefully all these years for occasions that felt properly worth its use. The lamp room greeted him exactly as it always did, the familiar smell of oil and salt air, the great lens beginning its slow, patient rotation as the evening light outside softened toward dusk. Silas settled into his worn chair, the same one that had cradled him through 32 years of storms and calm nights alike, and set his writing paper carefully beside him, though he did not begin immediately, content for a while simply to watch the sea through the wide familiar windows, gathering his thoughts the way he had learned over so many patient years to gather nearly everything else in his life. The evening was a mild one, the sea calm beneath a sky streaked gently with the first pink hints of sunset, gulls wheeling lazily above the rocks below, everything about the scene so ordinary and unremarkable that Silas found himself almost grateful for it, unwilling on this particular night to have his final watch complicated by any dramatic weather that might distract him from the quieter work he had planned for these last few hours, work that felt in its own way every bit as important as any storm he had ever faithfully weathered. He thought back, sitting there in the familiar, softing light, to his very first evening in this tower, arriving as a nervous young man of 26 with barely 6 weeks of training behind him, terrified in a way he had never properly admitted to anyone, least of all the gruff, kindly old keeper who had shown him the ropes during that first uncertain fortnight before finally, satisfied, retiring to the mainland himself. That old keeper, a man named Obadiah Marsh, had left behind his own brief note before departing, tucked into the front cover of the logbook, 3 short sentences that Silas had read so many times over the following decades that he could still recite them from memory without needing to check. He remembered Obadiah with particular fondness even now, a broad, weathered man who had spent nearly 40 years at this same post before Silas's own arrival, teaching him not through lengthy explanation, but through patient, repeated demonstration, walking him through the mechanism's proper maintenance 3, 4, 5 times over until the motions finally settled properly into Silas's own hands. Obadiah had been a man of few words generally, offering praise sparingly when it came, and Silas could still recall the particular quiet pride he felt the first time the old keeper had simply nodded once without comment after watching Silas complete the full evening routine entirely unassisted, a small gesture that meant more to his young, uncertain self than any amount of more effusive praise ever could. The two of them had shared exactly one final evening together before Obadiah's departure, sitting in companionable silence in this very lamp room, watching the sunset in a manner Silas had, at the time, found almost unbearably solemn, though he understood now, with the wisdom of his own approaching departure, precisely the particular weight that final evening must have carried for the old man. Obadiah had said little beyond his eventual brief note, though he had paused at the top of the stairs on his way down for the last time and told Silas in a voice rather rougher than his usual gruff tone that the tower had chosen well in him, and that he expected, without any real doubt, that Silas would keep the light every bit as faithfully as it deserved. The light doesn't care how frightened you are, it only cares that you show up. You'll do fine, lad, same as I did, same as whoever comes after you will too. Silas had carried those 3 sentences with him through 32 years of storms and quiet nights alike, through 2 great gales that had tested the tower's very foundations, through the birth of his daughter in the small cottage at the base of the point, through his wife's illness and eventual passing some 11 years back now, a loss that had settled into him slowly rather than sharply, the particular grief of a long, gentle unwinding rather than any sudden storm. Through all of it, Obadiah's simple, steady words had remained somewhere close to his heart, a quiet touchstone he returned to whenever the work grew difficult or the solitude grew heavy. Now, with his own retirement finally arrived, Silas understood, with a clarity that felt almost like relief, that it was his turn to leave behind exactly that same kind of small, steady gift for whoever came next. He had thought about this particular letter for months now, turning over in his mind what exactly 32 years of faithful keeping had actually taught him, what small essential truths deserved passing forward to a stranger he had not yet properly even met. He rose to check the mechanism first, as he always did at the start of any watch, running his weathered hands over the great lens's housing with the easy, practiced familiarity of a man who had performed this exact task perhaps 10,000 times across his career, though the number, when he actually tried to calculate it, seemed almost too large to properly comprehend. A quiet, private arithmetic he found himself returning to more than once across this particular, unusually reflective evening. 10,000 evenings, more or less, climbing these same worn stairs, checking these same brass fittings, watching this same patient beam sweep out across water that had, over the decades, become as familiar to him as his own two hands. Everything, as it nearly always was, proved to be in perfect working order, and Silas returned to his chair, poured himself a cup of tea from the thermos he had prepared before climbing up, and finally reached for his good pen and the waiting sheet of paper. He sat for a long moment simply looking at the blank page, feeling the particular weight of a task he had anticipated for months now finally actually arriving. "Dear Keeper," he wrote eventually, deciding against any more specific salutation since he did not yet properly know the young woman who would read these words, preferring instead to address whoever might hold this particular post, not just tomorrow, but at any point across whatever years lay ahead, long after his own name had likely faded from the tower's living memory into nothing more than a brief entry in some official record somewhere. I am writing this on my last evening at Gannett Point, after 32 years of keeping this particular light, and I find myself, now that the moment has properly arrived, less interested in offering practical instruction, which I trust you'll receive plenty of during your own training, and more interested in passing along whatever small wisdom these 3 decades have actually managed to teach me. He paused, sipping his tea, watching the sunset continue its slow, familiar progression beyond the windows before continuing. "The first thing I want you to know is that the solitude, which likely worries you more than anything else about this post, will not remain the burden it may currently seem. I remember my own first weeks here, counting the days until my next scheduled trip to the mainland, treating this tower rather more like a sentence to be served than a life to be properly lived. That feeling passed gradually and almost without my noticing somewhere around my 2nd year, replaced with something closer to genuine contentment, the particular piece of a life built around clear, steady purpose rather than constant company. I do not say this to diminish whatever nervousness you may currently be feeling. I say it only to promise you that it does, in time, ease into something considerably more comfortable, provided you allow it the patience to do so." He paused again, considering his words with particular care now, aware that whatever he wrote next would likely be read and reread many times over, whatever years this young woman spent tending this same patient light. The work asks little of you beyond steady attention, faithfully given, night after night, regardless of whether any particular evening feels especially significant or entirely unremarkable. Most nights, in my experience, prove unremarkable, and that, I have come to believe, is precisely as it should be. The tower does not need drama from its keeper, it needs only faithfulness, the simple, patient discipline of showing up properly, watch after watch, tending a light whose true value lies almost entirely in how thoroughly unremarkable it manages to make even the roughest crossing feel to whoever happens to be watching for its beam from some distant, uncertain deck. He paused again, considering his words with particular care now, aware that whatever he wrote next would likely be read and reread many times over, whatever years this young woman spent tending this same patient light. The work asks little of you beyond steady attention, faithfully given, night after night, regardless of whether any particular evening feels especially significant or entirely unremarkable. Most nights, in my experience, prove unremarkable, and that, I have come to believe, is precisely as it should be. The tower does not need drama from its keeper, it needs only faithfulness, the simple, patient discipline of showing up properly, watch after watch, tending a light whose true value lies almost entirely in how thoroughly unremarkable it manages to make even the roughest crossing feel to whoever happens to be watching for its beam from some distant, uncertain deck. He wrote, too, about the particular satisfaction of radio check-ins with the harbour stations further down the coast, the quiet camaraderie of fellow keepers exchanging brief, comfortable updates through even the roughest weather, a small community of solitary watchers he suspects she would come to treasure every bit as much as he himself had. Old Samuel, who had worked the harbour station for nearly as many years as Silas had kept this light, would likely still be there to greet her own first uncertain radio check-ins with the same patient, easy warmth he had always offered Silas across their own 3 decades of parallel watching. He wrote about his daughter's childhood, spent partly in the small keeper's cottage at the base of the tower, before the family had eventually moved to a proper house on the mainland once she'd reached school age. The particular joy of teaching a small child to identify different seabirds from the lamp room's high windows, of watching her grow slowly from a toddler fascinated by the great turning lens into a teenager rather more interested in her own mainland friendships, and finally into the accomplished, kind woman who had spent years now patiently encouraging her father toward exactly this retirement, understanding, with the particular wisdom of an adult child, that a parent's independence deserved respect right up until the moment it no longer served their own well-being. He remembered with particular fondness the summers she had returned to spend with him at the tower, even after the family's move to the mainland, arriving each June eager to reclaim her old room in the small cottage, spending long, sun-warmed days exploring the rocks below with a fisherman's net and an endless, cheerful curiosity about every crab and tide pool creature she managed to capture. She had wanted, for one particularly memorable summer, around her 10th year, to become a keeper someday, following faithfully in her father's footsteps, and Silas had never quite decided to feel more amused or touched by her serious, careful questions about exactly what qualifications the position required and whether her current swimming lessons might count toward her eventual training. That particular ambition had faded naturally as she grew older, replaced eventually by her own quite different path, university on the mainland, a career in marine biology that had in its own way kept her connected to the same coastal waters her father had spent his own career faithfully watching over. And finally, a family of her own, 2 children who now knew their grandfather's tower mainly through summer visits and the occasional grainy photograph rather than any lived daily familiarity. Silas held no particular regret about this natural evolution, understanding, as any patient parent eventually learns to understand, that a child's path rightfully belonged to the child rather than to whatever hopes a parent might once have quietly nurtured on their behalf. The sky outside had grown fully dark now. the stars emerging in their full, familiar constellation, the great lamp's beam sweeping steadily out across water that had, over so many years, become as intimately known to Silas as any close friend's face. He rose periodically to check the mechanism, performing the same faithful, unhurried rounds he had performed nightly for over 32 days, and returned each time to his letter, adding another paragraph, another small, hard-won piece of wisdom he hoped might serve his unknown successor half as well as Obadiah's own briefed words had once served him. He wrote eventually about the particular quality of solitude itself, the thing he suspected worried any new keeper more than any storm or mechanical failure ever properly could. You will, I promise, come to treasure the solitude rather than merely enduring it. There is a particular clarity available to a mind given proper space to think, uninterrupted by the constant small demands of a busier, more crowded life. And this tower offers exactly that clarity in abundance, provided you allow yourself the patience to receive it properly, rather than fighting against it. I have done some of my clearest thinking, my most honest reckoning with both grief and gratitude alike, in this very chair, watching this very sea, and I suspect, though I cannot promise it, that you may find something similar waiting for you here as well, in your own time, at your own particular pace. He paused to check the mechanism once more, finding everything exactly as it should be, and returned to his chair feeling the particular pleasant tiredness that had always accompanied his longer watches, a tiredness earned rather than merely endured, the honest fatigue of a body and mind that had spent their hours in genuinely worthwhile work. He wrote a while longer about smaller, more practical matters. Which local shop in the mainland town offered the best supplies for the tower's particular needs? Which of the harbor station operators tended to work the overnight radio shifts and could be relied upon for cheerful, steady company during long, quiet hours? The particular rhythm of the ferry schedule that would govern her own trips to and from the mainland across whatever years she chose to remain in this post. Finally, as the night deepened further and his own eyes began growing pleasantly heavy, Silas turned to the letter's closing, wanting to leave his successor with something that might properly capture the full accumulated gratitude of 32 years spent in exactly this small, particular calling. I will not pretend that I know how long you'll keep this post, whether it becomes, as it did for me, the defining work of your entire adult life, or simply one meaningful chapter among several others still waiting ahead of you. Either way, I hope you find here something of what I found, a place that asks honest, patient work of you and offers in return a clarity and peace that proves difficult to locate almost anywhere else. I hope you come to know this light's particular moods as intimately as I have. I hope the solitude teaches you whatever it is uniquely suited to teach you, just as it taught me. And I hope, whenever your own time here eventually draws to its close, you leave behind some small portion of the same gratitude I feel tonight, sitting in this familiar chair for what I now properly understand to be one of the last times. Thank you for taking up this work. The light needs keeping, faithfully and without fanfare, and I am deeply glad to know it will continue finding exactly that faithful keeping in your capable hands. With warm respect and considerable gratitude, Silas Fenwick, keeper of Gannett Point Light, 32 years. He set down his pen at last, reading back through the whole letter slowly, correcting a small handful of minor errors, before folding the pages carefully and tucking them into an envelope he had brought along for exactly this purpose, writing simply, "To the next keeper," across its front in his own steady, familiar hand. He rose one final time to check the mechanism, performing the same faithful rounds he had performed nightly for 32 years, running his weathered hands over the great lens's housing, confirming the rotation gears turned smoothly. The fuel supply remained properly topped, everything exactly as it should be for whatever hours remained before dawn and Bridget Callahan's arrival on the first ferry. He placed the sealed envelope carefully on the small desk beneath the window, propped against the logbook where his successor would be certain to find it, and settled back into his worn chair, allowing himself for these final hours of his final watch simply to sit and watch the great lamp's patient, familiar rhythm sweep steadily out across the dark water, exactly as it had for 32 faithful years, exactly as it would, he trusted now, with quiet certainty, continue doing for many years yet to come, tended by hands he had never met, but had nonetheless, through this evening's careful letter, already come to trust completely. He thought of Obadiah Marsh's 3 brief sentences, still remembered clearly after all these decades, and felt a settled, grateful satisfaction that he had managed in his own more elaborate way to pass forward something of that same essential gift, the promise that the work, however solitary and however demanding, remained fundamentally good, fundamentally worth the faithful showing up it required, night after unremarkable night, for as long as any particular keeper chose to answer that steady, patient calling. The rocks below the tower continued their familiar murmur against the calm evening tide, gulls settling one by one into whatever roosting spots the night called them toward, the whole small point wrapped in the same peaceful, unhurried stillness Silas had come to know so intimately across 3 decades of faithful watching. He thought of his daughter, likely already preparing the guest room in her own home for his imminent arrival, of his grandchildren, whom he would finally have proper, regular time to know, rather than the occasional visits his post had previously allowed. He thought too of Bridget Callahan, sleeping soundly somewhere on the mainland tonight, unaware that her own first night in this tower would begin with a letter written by a stranger who already somehow wished her every possible good fortune in the work ahead. His eyes grew heavier still as the night deepened, the great lamp continuing its faithful circuit above him, and Silas allowed himself, for perhaps the first time in 32 years of watches, to properly rest within his chair, rather than maintaining his usual careful vigilance, trusting the mechanism's steady hum to carry the towers safely through these final hours, without requiring his constant attention, the way he had once trusted Obadiah's parting words to carry him through his own uncertain beginning so many decades earlier. He thought, drifting now toward a sleep he had rarely permitted himself during an actual watch, that this particular ending felt entirely fitting. One faithful keeper finally resting within the very chair where he had kept his vigil for so many patient years, his letter waiting quietly on the desk beside him for the next steady pair of hands, the great light continuing its ancient, patient work, regardless of whose watch officially claimed this particular night. The sea continued its calm, unhurried murmur against the rocks below, the stars wheeling their own slow, patient circuit overhead, and Silas's breathing gradually slowed to match that same ancient, steady rhythm, his body loose and warm within his familiar chair, his whole long career settling now into its final peaceful hours with the same quiet gratitude that had carried him faithfully through every year that had come before it. He He thought once more of Obadiah's 3 brief sentences, of Margaret's patient 20 years of shared sunsets, of his daughter's small, careful questions about swimming lessons and keeper qualifications, of Bridget Callahan's own unknown future unfolding tomorrow in this very chair, beneath this very lamp, and felt, gathering all of it together in these final drifting moments, a contentment so complete he could not properly imagine wanting to alter a single year of the long, faithful path that had led him here. Somewhere between one soft breath and the next, between the lamp's own slow, sweeping beam and the sea's patient, endless murmur, Silas Senwick slipped gently into sleep, carried there by 32 years of faithful service, finally properly concluded, his letter waiting patiently for the morning, for Bridget Callahan's careful hands, for whatever years of her own faithful keeping still lay ahead, tended now by a light that would, he trusted completely, continue its steady, patient work, exactly as it always had, long after his own watch had finally, gently ended. The end.